For centuries, the image of a pirate has been almost exclusively male. Hollywood gave us Jack Sparrow, Blackbeard, and Captain Hook, but history tells a very different story. Some of the most cunning, ruthless, and successful pirates to ever sail the oceans were women. Their names have been erased from popular memory, buried under the legends of their male counterparts, but their impact was undeniable. These women were rebels, warriors, and survivors who defied every expectation of their time. Let's begin with Bonny Mary Read, perhaps the most famous duo of female pirates in history. Both were born in Europe at the end of the 1600s, and both found themselves drawn to lives that rejected the roles society tried to force on them. Bonny, raised in Ireland and later moving to the Americas, was fiery, independent, and known for her sharp temper. She disguised herself as a man to gain more freedom and eventually joined pirate crews in the Caribbean. Mary Read had a similar path, disguising herself as a man from a young age so she could serve in the military, ride horses, and later join pirate ships. Together, these two women sailed with the notorious pirate Calico Jack, and accounts say they fought more fiercely than most of the men on board. In fact, during one famous battle, when their ship was attacked and most of the male pirates hid below deck, Anne and Mary stayed above, weapons drawn, shouting at the men to fight like cowards would not. Their defiance became legendary. But Anne and Mary were not alone. Long before them, there was Ching Shih, arguably the most powerful pirate in history, male or female. She began her life in China as a prostitute before being captured by pirates. Instead of becoming a victim, she married the pirate leader, and when he died, took command of his entire fleet. At the height of her power, Ching Shih commanded more than 1,800 ships and over 70,000 men. She created her own pirate code, punished betrayal with brutal efficiency, and even defeated the Chinese navy, European merchants, and Portuguese warships sent to destroy her. Unlike most pirates who met bloody ends, Ching Shih negotiated her retirement with the Chinese government and lived out her days in peace, one of the only pirate captains to retire rich and free. These women were not just outliers, they were symbols of defiance in societies that tried to silence them. Their stories show that piracy was never just about treasure and plunder. It was also about freedom, rebellion, and breaking the chains of oppressive social systems. And while Bonny, Mary Read, and Ching Shih are the best-known examples, they are far from the only ones. In the next part of this story, we'll uncover even more forgotten women of the seas and the brutal punishments, betrayals, and victories that defined them. One of the earliest female pirates on record was Grace O'Malley, often called the Pirate Queen of Ireland. Born in 1530, Grace grew up on the rugged western coast of Ireland, where the ocean was both a lifeline and a battlefield. From a young age, she was fearless, defying her father's wishes by cutting her hair short and disguising herself as a boy so she could join his ships. Grace commanded fleets that raided English and Spanish vessels, making her one of the most feared figures on the seas of the North Atlantic. But Grace O'Malley was more than just a pirate. She was a leader of her people, fighting against English colonial domination. In one of the most remarkable episodes of her life, Grace sailed to England and demanded a meeting with Queen Elizabeth I. Two women, both powerful in worlds dominated by men, came face to face. Grace refused to bow or acknowledge Elizabeth as her superior, and yet she still managed to negotiate the release of her captured son. This meeting showed that Grace was not only a pirate, but also a political strategist who used her power to defend her clan and her freedom. Now let's turn to Jeanne de Clisson, known as the Lioness of Brittany. Her story is one of vengeance. Born into French nobility in the early 1300s, Jeanne lived a privileged life until her husband was accused of treason and executed by the French king. Furious and broken, she swore revenge. Selling her lands, she bought a fleet of ships, painted them black, and dyed her sails blood red. For the next 13 years, Jeanne terrorized French ships in the English Channel, earning her reputation as one of the most ruthless pirates in history. Her attacks were not random. They were targeted at the French crown, a one-woman war at sea. Then there's Fanny Campbell, an American woman from the early 1800s. Unlike the others, her piracy began almost by accident. Her fiancé was captured by pirates in the Caribbean, and rather than wait helplessly at home, Fanny disguised herself as a man, boarded a ship, and set out to rescue him. She not only freed her fiancé, but also ended up becoming a pirate captain herself, commanding a crew and raiding ships with remarkable success. Fanny's story was later published in a sensational novel in 1845, blending fact and legend, but it cemented her place as one of the few American women to take up the pirate's life. These stories reveal something important. Women turned to piracy for many reasons. For some, it was survival. For others, it was revenge, love, or the pursuit of freedom. But all of them had to defy the expectations of their time. They disguised themselves as men, fought battles against impossible odds, and carved their names into history, even if most of the world tried to erase them. And their stories don't end here. In the next part, we'll dive into the daily lives of these women, the dangers they faced, the punishments that awaited them if they were caught, and how they used disguise, deception, and ferocity to command respect in one of the most dangerous worlds imaginable. Life at sea was brutal for everyone, but for women pirates, it carried even greater risks. Most women who sailed disguised themselves as men because if they were discovered, they could face harsher punishments than their male counterparts. On a pirate ship, survival depended on strength, cunning, and the ability to blend in. Women who could fight, swear, and drink alongside their crewmates often went undetected for months, sometimes years. Bonny and Mary Read are perhaps the most famous examples. Sailing in the early 1700s with the notorious pirate Calico Jack, both women dressed as men when they first joined the crew. But even when their identities became known, they fought with such ferocity that their shipmates respected them. Witnesses described Anne and Mary as fiercer in battle than many of the men, wielding pistols and cutlasses with deadly precision. When Calico Jack's ship was finally captured, the male pirates were too drunk to resist, but Anne and Mary fought to the very end, cursing their crewmates for cowardice. Punishment for piracy was terrifying. If captured, pirates were almost always sentenced to death, usually by hanging. Women pirates faced the same fate, but Bonny and Mary Read managed to escape execution by claiming pregnancy, a legal loophole at the time. Mary died in prison, but Anne's ultimate fate is still shrouded in mystery. Some say she escaped and lived quietly under a new name, proof that even history couldn't entirely erase her. Beyond combat, women pirates also brought unique strategies to leadership. Grace O'Malley negotiated treaties. Jeanne de Clisson used psychological warfare, painting her ships black and her sails blood red. Fanny Campbell used wit and disguise to command respect in an era that denied women any authority. They weren't just anomalies, they were innovators in a dangerous world where survival meant constantly outthinking the enemy. Their presence on the seas also revealed cracks in the rigid gender roles of the time. In societies where women were expected to remain silent and obedient, these pirates proved they could lead, inspire fear, and command loyalty. They forced men to recognize their strength, even if history later tried to bury their names. By looking at their lives, we see that piracy wasn't just about treasure and violence. For women, it was about breaking chains, the chains of poverty, patriarchy, and expectation. It was about carving out freedom in one of the few spaces where rules didn't apply, where the sea itself became a battleground for survival and identity. And yet, these stories remain little known today, often treated as curiosities rather than crucial pieces of history. But when we examine them closely, they change how we see both piracy and the role of women in history. In the next part, we'll explore how these stories faded into obscurity and how modern historians are finally rediscovering the forgotten history of women pirates. For centuries, the stories of women pirates were deliberately erased or dismissed as legends. Chroniclers and court historians preferred to focus on the exploits of male captains, shaping piracy into a masculine tale of adventure and rebellion. When women did appear in official records, they were often described as anomalies, freak occurrences, or cautionary examples. The idea that women could fight, lead, and inspire fear fear didn't fit the narrative of the time, so their stories were silenced. Take Bonny and Mary Read. Despite eyewitness accounts of their ferocity, many early histories reduced them to footnotes, or worse, dismissed them as exaggerations. Grace O'Malley's negotiations with Queen Elizabeth were downplayed, her achievements recast as eccentric rather than strategic. Jeanne de Clisson's black-sailed fleet became more folklore than fact, remembered in whispers rather than textbooks. Even Ching Shih, who commanded the largest pirate fleet in history, tens of thousands of sailors, was long ignored in Western narratives simply because she was a woman from outside Europe. This erasure wasn't accidental. History has always been written by those in power, and women who broke societal norms were rarely celebrated. In many cases, their legacies were intentionally buried, their accomplishments attributed to men, or their stories rewritten to fit patriarchal expectations. Over time, what survived were fragments, trial records, sailors' journals, ballads, and folklore. These fragments painted a different picture, but they were scattered and easily overlooked. It wasn't until modern historians began re-examining these sources that the fuller truth began to emerge. Academic interest in women's history during the 20th century reopened old archives and unearthed forgotten testimonies. Suddenly, the fragments came together, revealing women who weren't just passengers or victims, but leaders, fighters, and survivors who helped shape the age of piracy. Even today, though, their stories remain overshadowed by the larger-than-life figures of Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, or Henry Morgan. Ask the average person to name a pirate, and they'll likely think of a man. Yet the rediscovery of these women's lives forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. History was never as one-sided as we were told. Women were there all along, not just watching, but actively changing the course of events. The sea gave them an opportunity no land could offer: freedom from rigid social structures, a chance to define themselves by courage and skill rather than by gender. And that truth is too powerful to be buried again. In the final part, we'll explore why these stories matter today, how the forgotten history of women pirates challenges our understanding of gender, power, and freedom, and why remembering them changes not just the past, but also the way we imagine the future. The stories of women pirates may seem like curiosities from a distant past, but they carry lessons that still matter today. These women lived in a world that told them they were powerless, that their roles were confined to home and family. Yet they stepped aboard ships, picked up weapons, commanded men, and in some cases defied entire empires. They broke through barriers centuries before concepts like equality or feminism were spoken aloud. Their lives were proof that even in the harshest conditions, people can seize freedom and carve their own path. Bonny and Mary Read showed that courage and loyalty could make even the fiercest enemies respect them. Grace O'Malley proved that a woman could be both pirate and politician, negotiating on equal terms with a queen. Jeanne de Clisson turned personal tragedy into a 13-year campaign of vengeance that shook the French crown. And Ching Shih commanded the largest pirate fleet in history, not through luck, but with discipline, strategy, and unflinching authority. Each of these women pushed against the boundaries of their world, and though history tried to forget them, their defiance still echoes across time. Remembering them matters, because history shapes how we see ourselves. For too long, the story of piracy, and of history more broadly, was told only through the lens of men. By bringing these women back into the narrative, we acknowledge that power, rebellion, and leadership have never belonged to just one gender. Their stories expand our understanding of what was possible in the past, and by doing so, they expand our imagination for the present and the future. So the next time you picture a pirate, don't just think of Blackbeard or Captain Kidd. Think of Bonny shouting at her crewmates to fight. Think of Mary Read refusing to surrender. Think of Grace O'Malley sailing into London to demand freedom. Think of Ching Shih commanding 70,000 men and negotiating her retirement on her own terms. These women didn't just survive history, they shaped it. And that's why we tell their stories today, not as footnotes, not as exceptions, but as reminders that history is always more complex, more diverse, and more rebellious than we were taught. If you enjoyed uncovering this forgotten chapter of history, please like this video, subscribe, and share it. Your support helps us continue to bring the hidden and untold stories of the past back into the light. And let us know in the comments, which pirate story shocked you the most? Because sometimes the most powerful tales aren't the ones we've heard 1,000 times, but the ones that were almost lost to the sea.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more deep dives into the world's incredible histories.